changed was that arbitration law came into play.
Okay. But that contract language has not changed in the last 2 rounds of interest arbitration, has it?
It has remained the same. They were able to get through this award, but they weren't able to get in the last 2 rounds of the bargain.
Let me ask you something. All this money that was paid out, you and I can probably agree that if you just followed the arbitrator's award, you wouldn't have paid this money, would you have?
I'm not going to say that mistakes were not made, but we've never actually seen it.
All right, we don't need. Good.
I'm not going to say the mistakes were not made during the equalization process. It's a very labor-intensive process, and it takes a long time to do it. Our managers spend a significant amount of time each day. We're going to hear some testimony about that. Working the lists, adjusting them, making the phone calls, trying to get the right people. 8 hours is not a realistic standard. It was the first time we had ever seen it. There have been other awards that came out. Nobody ever created an 8-hour standard.
Okay. And we'll get into some testimony about the hiring process and how difficult that standard is to meet. Go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide. Liz. Thank you. Okay, SCI Dallas. Lieutenant, you're from SCI Dallas, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and your responsibility, SCI Dallas, as a lieutenant, would be hiring overtime?
Yes, that's part of my duties.
Okay. If you could briefly go through the hiring process under the current contract language for hiring overtime equalization.
We create a list every day, and we start with the most senior employee with the least amount of hours, and we offer him the first available overtime.
Okay, and if I could just refer the panel to Exhibit 5, it's an example of one of those lists. And let me back up. This is pure contract language you're following at Dallas.
Yes, we do not have a local agreement.
And how many correctional officer ones sign up for voluntary overtime equalization approximately?
Approximately 300.
Okay. Continue.
And again, we generate the list every day. We start with the most senior employee with the least amount of overtime. We attempt to contact that employee. And if we get into contact with them, we offer them the overtime. If they accept it, they're charged for the 8 hours. If they refuse, they're charged for 8 hours. If we can't get in contact with them, then they stay where they're at on the list and we go to the next person.
Now, when you say that they're charged for 8 hours if they accept the overtime, or they're charged with 8 hours if they refuse the overtime, what does that mean? What are you charging?
That's how we keep track of the hours. 8 hours for work, or if they refuse, they're still charged for the 8 hours.
And that's in line with the contract language with attempt to equalize?
Yes.
Okay. So when a call is made to an officer for overtime, and either the phone goes unanswered or an answering machine is picked up, what happens to that situation?
They remain where they're at on the list since we can't, by contract, give them a refusal or offer them the overtime if they don't answer their phone.
Those hours are not counted as equalization?
Not counted.
So let's say, for example, I put my name on the overtime equalization list at the beginning of the period, January, and I don't work one overtime assignment. I don't answer my phone, I don't reject one, and I don't accept an offer. Where would I be on that list?
You would be number 1 on the list with no hours.
Okay. According to the Machman Award, I'd be brought up to the person that has the most overtime equalized hours within 8 hours.
Yes.
So, do you have an idea on potential, well, maybe even the exhibit here? Let's say the person with the top hours equalized is 220 hours, and I'm on that bottom of the list with 0 hours. I'm going to get 212 hours paid out.
Yes.
For not working.
Yes.
Let me ask you this question. How difficult is the hiring process going through that list?
Well, it's quite difficult. What you have to do is, first of all, find out how many overtimes you need in the next 3 days. And there's 3 shifts for each day. Then you take the list and start going down. And if you come to the first person on the list, you have to look and see if they're off on a vacation day, off on a sick day, depending on what shift they're working. If the shift they're working is where the overtime is, then they're not available to work that. You have to check to see if they're off on military, if they're off on long-term sick. And again, you have to do it for each day and each shift, 3 days.
And yourself as a lieutenant and other lieutenants are human, so their mistakes are made.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if mistakes are brought to your attention during the equalization period, how do you handle them?
Okay, like if I hired somebody for tomorrow, if I hired them today to work tomorrow, and then I go home today, and when I come back in the next day, they say, well, the trip came back earlier, they brought inmates back from the hospital, they charged me for that 8 hours, but I didn't work. And I would just go into the computer and delete the 8 hours that they didn't work, and the computer would automatically move them up on the list to where they should be.
Okay. How much time does a lieutenant at SCI Dallas take throughout the course of an 8-hour shift hiring overtime?
Depending on the day of the week, on a military weekend, you can spend a whole shift, 8 hours calling.
8 hours.
Yes.
Is that all a lieutenant's responsibility is at SCI Dallas, is to call overtime?
No.
What other responsibilities do you have?
Supervising the officers in the chow hall, making up the rosters for the next day, supervising the officers in the yard, restricted housing unit, making rounds of the housing units, signing the logbooks, numerous duties, employee performance evaluations.
And with all of the challenges that you described with the hiring process as the current language exists, is it realistic to equalize 200 and plus correctional officer ones to within 8 hours?
No. There are officers on the list that have never worked in overtime.
How do you know that?
Called the overtime.
Okay.
I know.
And so you believe there are people that put their name on a list and then throughout 6 months of an equalization period never actually work an overtime assignment?
Yes, that's true.
Lieutenant, when you try to reach somebody and you can't reach them and you don't charge them the overtime hours, where did that procedure come from? Is that in the contract? Is that procedure developed by the
It's
by
not in the
department?
contract.
By agreement?
It's not in the contract, but if I try to reach somebody by phone and I don't get a hold of them, I'll leave a message and tell them that there is overtime available. Again, if they don't call back, they're not charged, so.
I understand that, but why aren't they charged? That's what I'm asking.
The contract says that you charge them if they accept or refuse
Okay.
the offer.
Okay. So that's your interpretation of the contract language. And I'm doing some of this from memory, just from the hearing we had a couple months ago.
Right.
We've not counted missed calls or voicemail answering machines as.
Okay, understood.
They don't count as hours equalized by contract, but the Commonwealth has used the argument that they've attempted to equalize because they've made hundreds of attempts
Right.
to people that they've never been able to get a hold of.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Lieutenant. All right. Deputy Tice.
Yes.
Where are you from again right now?
SCI Forest.
Okay. And have you had issues with overtime equalization at SCI Forest?
We have a different situation of Forest. We actually have a local agreement with the association.
You know what, let me stop you there for a second. Let me come back to Mr. Stanton, and I'll come back to you. Mr. Stanton, you, as the Labor Relations Coordinator for the department, we've gone through several years of dealing with this Monroe Award. As the statewide labor coordinator dealing with these overtime issues and equalization grievances, what have you done, what ideas have you come up with to try to resolve this issue of paying out money for time hours?
We've had a significant number of conversations with the Pscoa, both at the state level and then at local levels. The closest we've come to fix this was at SCI Forest, where in 2010 we negotiated a side agreement where they agreed to, the agreement waives a 6-month equalization requirement. It's a daily sign-up system, so it reduced the number of people that were making themselves available for a specific shift. They sign up for the shift and date that they are willing to work. So it reduces the number of people we have to call to fill the overtime. In addition, we created a remedy if a mistake is made. and we refer to it as a voucher. The voucher allows the officer to work an overtime shift at their discretion to make up for the error. So they would get to work and earn the money that way. The local was agreeable to this. They did demand, though, and require that we had language in the agreement that said if the voucher is not redeemed within a set period of time, I believe it's 45 days, it would convert to comp time or pay. But I was, in those discussions, I was told people are not going to wait 45 days for the pay. They're going to work the voucher to get the money as soon as they can. So, although it wasn't perfect, we decided, all right, we're going to go with it. We think this is the best solution to the problem. We signed that, I believe, in April of 2010.
Would that scrap the equalization for FARs? Like, you no longer had to be equalized?
No, it's more of a daily equalization. So they adjust the day, they hire based on most senior with the fewest hours worked. But the requirement to have everybody equalized over the 6-month period is waived. It's more of a daily equalization.
Right, so if you did look, I understand it's waived, so you look at the end of 6 months, there's not going to be anything close to equalization.
Correct, because if you only sign up for one day and you get hired, you can't be equalized with somebody who signs up every day.
Right, so you got totally away from the concept of equalization. You really set up an overtime system on a day-to-day basis.
Correct.
Okay.
And is the voucher for if somebody got missed? So if I'm next on the list and you skip over me and you call Mr. Dutroux, I would get a voucher?
Correct.
That's how it works.
And then you would be able to cash that voucher in, I believe, at any time up to an hour prior to the start of the shift. Just tell us, hey, I want to work today, give us the voucher.
Now, is that because you always have slots you could fit me in with my voucher?
No, most of the time the overtime is hired well in advance of that 1 hour, so we have everybody we need. In lieu of paying for hours unworked, we'll find something for them to do that day.
Deputy Tice, back to you.
Yes.
You've been at Forrest, excuse me, since when?
Since January of this year.
Okay, and you have knowledge and experience with regard to this local overtime equalization agreement Mr. Stanton just spoke about?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And let me ask you this. As far as your lieutenants making the overtime calls, has it reduced the amount of time that they spend calling for overtime?
Yes.
Okay. Has it been able to reduce the amount of mistakes, the number of mistakes that are made?
In some ways, yes.
Okay. And has it reduced the amount of time, I just asked, I'm sorry. Let me ask you this. Has this agreement corrected an overtime equalization problem at SCI Forest?
No, it has not.
Why is it not?
Since this voucher agreement was incepted, there's been a total of 47 vouchers issued. Since that period of time, I believe the first one issued in June of 2010. Since then, 47 have been issued, and out of those 47 vouchers, only one voucher has been exercised for hours worked.
So the commitment that Mr. Stanton understood with regard to the intent of this agreement, that people would be cashing in and not wait, has not occurred?
It has not.
Okay.
I just want to clarify one thing, Brian. I think the question was, does that solve the equalization problem? Your answer being no, but it's not a question of the
Okay.
equalization problem. It hasn't solved your paying a lot for, I think you called it rocking chair time or something?
Rocking chair time.
Yeah, so it hasn't solved your rocking chair pay problem.
It has not.
Okay. Because,
Thank you.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Brian, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why not, if you have a voucher, then why not say to the officer, okay, give me a date within the next 3 weeks, give me 2 days, give me 3 days, the next 3 weeks, and shifts. And I know I'm going to need overtime for one of those, I'll slot you in.
The way the agreement's written and the spirit of the agreement, as I read it, was put the responsibility in the officer's hands, that whenever he wanted to use the voucher, it was at his discretion. He could, within 2 hours of the start of the shift, he could present a voucher for hours work.
Okay. So we'll come back to Mr. Stanton now.
Is this the side letter, by the way, in Exhibit 6?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. If you see Exhibit 6 is the SI Forest Agreement, and Exhibit 7 is the voucher report as